It moves like a nightmare stitched from 4 different dreams. A lion with a goat's head rising from its back, a dragon's wings, and a serpent tail that hisses and bites. The Chimera is not one beast, but many. A living contradiction that transgresses boundaries of species, type, and reality. And that world-rattling horror is exactly why it can be so profoundly helpful to us. So let's invite this beast to the table and see what it has to say. My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a therapist turned author and co-creator of the Betwixt app. And this video is for anyone who's ever felt pulled asunder by disparate parts of themselves. In other words, all of us. The Chimera comes from Greek mythology. It was the offspring of the terrifying Typhon and Echidna, and a sibling of Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of the underworld, and Hydra, an also multi-headed serpentine monster slayed by Heracles at Lerna, another entrance to the underworld. What I'm saying here is that this would have been one seriously gruesome family portrait. Now, it's worth noting here that the term chimera has come to describe any mythical or fictional creature with parts taken from various animals. So these days, centaurs, mermaids, and fauns are all considered chimeras with a lowercase c. In this video, we're discussing the original chimera, proud owner of a capital C. In his book Monsters, David D. Gilmour describes the amalgamative nature of the chimera, not just one creature but a mishmash of many, as a defining characteristic of monsterhood. In order to be monstrous, something must transcend boundaries. The vampire, for example, is human plus animal, the bat mainly, but sometimes the wolf. Were creatures obviously follow this same pattern. Zombies and ghosts are both alive and dead. Witches and skinwalkers are both human and familiar, and magical, superhuman, other. As such, monsters are challenging in a number of ways. Morally challenging, what is good, what is bad, where is the line between the two? Cognitively challenging, what is real, what is make-believe, and how do I know the difference? And existentially challenging. Monsters defy the rules, refusing to fit into the categories that provide us with a sense of normalcy, order, and therefore our oh-so-comforting illusion of control. In Gilmour's words, monsters highlight the arbitrariness and fragility of culture. What's interesting is that we seem to have a fundamental need to be challenged in this way. No matter how uncomfortable this existential rug pull might feel, we crave monsters, dream of them, invent them as children, write them into our stories, and create them when they're denied us, as discussed in the first episode of this series. The Chimera, then, is the archetypal monster, the embodiment of chaos, contradiction, terror, and confusion, born of a family of demonic beasts associated with death, darkness, and the underworld. Shudder. Noting that the prevalence of monsters in art, literature, and folklore grew exponentially with the genesis of monotheism, Gilmour discusses the paradoxical closeness of the monstrous and the divine. Where God arrived to play the role of good, sacred, all-powerful father figure, the light, monsters possessed that same numinous mix of unnatural power, terror, and otherness, but in darkness. In other words, monsters became the necessary shadow for the divine, awe-inspiring, chaotic forces that give shape to the concept of goodness by opposition. To view this theme from a psychological perspective, the monstrous is required for us to make sense of ourselves, what it means to be human, to be good, to be lovable, to be happy. Of course, we are all chimeric in a sense. We cheerfully entertain the illusion of a constant singular self, the self we refer to when we say I or me, but there is no singular I for any of us. We each shift and morph between versions of self from context to context and over the course of our lives. We don't like to acknowledge this though. Just as with the ship of Theseus, if we are rebuilt piece by piece over the years, beliefs, habits, perspectives, what is there left at the end? Where am I in all of this? It's super uncomfortable, so we cling to the feeling of being the same vessel, charting a continuous course through time, even when presented with solid evidence that we are not the same people we were in the past. In psychology, this is known as the end of history illusion. Harvard psychologist Dr. Daniel Gilbert found that when people are given time to reflect, they can see massive differences between their current and former selves. However, when asked to project forward 10 years, consistently, people of all ages predict only small changes between their current and future selves. And our chimeric nature runs deeper than the big life changes of 10 years' time. Inside, moment by moment, different parts of us take the wheel. Parts with their own beliefs, skills, wounds and desires. Parts of different ages, each trying to protect us in their own way. You've probably heard yourself say things like, part of me just wants to scream, or I hate how needy I feel, or I should be over this by now, or I don't know what came over me. These moments show how it feels when contradiction rises to the surface. We don't like it. We'd rather cling to the illusion of being one simple, consistent thing. And so we spend decades at war with ourselves trying to cut away the very parts that could make us feel whole. The great irony is that this resistance, this effort to exile or amputate the pieces of us that don't seem to fit, is what makes them monstrous. The key is not to slay these parts, but to invite them back in, to reintegrate them, just as the Chimera embodies its many selves. So is the Chimera really a devilish, fearsome anti-god? Or is it a metaphor for the totality of self, an integrated whole? Is this monster, in other words, actually godly? The reality is not that monsters are opposed to goodness so much as order. Internally, they're at odds with the consistency illusion that we like so much, and externally, with the directives of society and the simplistic rules we're supposed to follow when it comes to who we are. Be good, be strong, be certain, be reliable. But real human beings are not that simple. We can be kind and angry, hopeful and grieving, tender and ferocious, confident and ashamed, wild and wise. We are everything all at once. But rather than embrace this, we flinch away from such paradoxes because they threaten our sense of control. Control, control, control. This is the nub of it. The Chimera personifies our fear of losing control. If I allow my anger, will it devour my kindness? If I embrace my wildness, will I lose my reason? If I admit my grief, will it drown my hope? The unconscious self doesn't think in binaries, and it isn't afraid of contradiction. It's only the conscious, rational mind that fears chaos. Because when chaos abounds, we can't even pretend that we're on top of things. So we squeeze our eyes shut, smooth out the edges, try to flatten our nature into something neat, choosing the parts we like and cutting off the rest. But integration doesn't mean choosing one head and severing the others. It means letting every part have a seat at the table. In internal family systems therapy, or IFS, we learn that each of the many parts that make us up has its own story along with its own ideas on how to keep us safe. The angry part wants to fight, the avoidant part to flee, the perfectionist to achieve, the wounded child to weep. None of these aspects of self is monstrous, but when ignored, repressed, or in the language of IFS, exiled, well, that's when they start to roar or spit fire, spread their wings and loom larger than life. I'd argue that this is what the Chimera exists to show us. Its message is an anguished, eternal cry for integration of resisted selves, and therefore acceptance of inner contradiction. So if it feels safe and comfortable to do so, I'd like to finish here by inviting you to consider one of your own contradictions. For example, perhaps part of you wants to throw caution to the wind and up sticks to move somewhere amazing, while another part craves the comfort of familiarity. Perhaps you see yourself as wild and carefree on some days, but as reliable and mature on others. Perhaps you both desire and dread something like competition or change, or perhaps you both want to quit and continue with a particular habit. Take a breath, relax your muscles, and open your mind. I'm going to present you with 4 incomplete sentences, and I'd like you to see how your mind chooses to fill in the gaps. You don't have to complete all 4 if one comes easiest, but of course you can if you like. Here you go. 1. Part of me wants to, but another part needs. 2. On the one hand, I see myself as, but on the other, I like to think of myself as. 3. Part of me wants to run from, but another part of me needs. 4. I find it hard to choose between, and. You can pause the video if you need a moment, and I'm putting some examples up on the screen for extra help if you need it. Then, if and when you can think of a contradiction of any kind, imagine for a moment that on either side of the divide is a different part of the self. Then, if it feels okay, see if you can imagine an animal or monstrous form for each part. For instance, perhaps the part that craves freedom looks like a bird or a flying fish, while the part that wants safety might take the form of a tortoise or hedgehog. The part of yourself that you see as strong and dependable might look like an elephant, while the carefree dreamer might look like a unicorn or a butterfly. You don't need perfect representations. Anything that comes to mind will do. When you have your 2 animals, take a moment to wonder how, if such things were allowed, you might combine them into one chimera. It might be simple, as with a centaur or mermaid, half one thing and half the other. It might be more complex like the chimera, requiring multiple heads and improbable anatomy. Or it might combine to become something totally different. A newt merged with a firefly becomes a tiny fire-breathing dragon. Obviously, there's no right or wrong here. This is your chimera, your imagination. You can do with it whatever the hell you like. When you have an idea, take a look at the fantastical beast you've just created. Or, if you're not a visual person, feel into it, sense it, imagine it in whatever way works for you. It probably seems absurd, perhaps childish, funny. It might feel quite grotesque. All of these things are fine. More than fine, actually. They're the point. The object of this little exercise is simply to allow this seemingly impossible thing to be. When you have it, whatever it is, I'd like you to imagine that you can release your chimera into the world. Whether you'd set it free to roam the tundra, to wander through the forest, to swim in the ocean, or to live in a city up a mountain behind a waterfall, doesn't really matter. Just that you can give it a home, some kind of space to call its own. Lastly, as you imagine your chimera in the wild, or as you just breathe and relax if you haven't followed the process, I'd like to leave you with the chimera's key piece of wisdom, which is that although the modern world exerts pressure on all of us to define ourselves neatly, the truth is messier and richer. Because you might be a healer and a warrior, a skeptic and a mystic, a leader and a wanderer, and that's okay. Your complexity is your power, not your flaw. The process of individuation, according to Jung, is a lifelong journey of becoming more and more uniquely yourself, integrating every part, every shadow, every dream, every contradiction that you come across as you grow. It's not neat, and it won't ever be finished. Instead, it's a living, breathing, ever-changing thing, just like the chimera itself. And so with this, we've completed our epic journey through these 10 meaningful monsters, each with its own vital message. The sea monster posed the initial question: are you ready to face your own mystery? Medusa taught us that pain can become our strength when allowed to be seen. The vampire invited us to guard our lifeblood and feed our souls fully. The witch cast a spell to help us trust our wild intuition even when the world finds it threatening. The dragon demonstrated that fear is the gate to transformation. The ghost whispered that grief and memory must be honoured, not exiled. The beast showed us that loving the shadow leads to liberation and wholeness. The werewolf howled that transformation and instinct are natural, not shameful. The zombie warned us against the death of spirit and called us back from numbness to life. And now the chimera, the final monster, the ultimate monster, shares the ultimate truth. You are all of it. You are wound and wisdom, beast and beauty, shadow and light. And you are vaster, wilder, more magnificent than you were ever taught to believe. Which means that you do not exist to be simple, but to be real. Fully, messily, gloriously, and paradoxically alive. And that is a magical thing. If you are still with me at the end of this epic saga, then you're my kind of person. Come and join the Betwixt community over on Discord. I would love to chat with you there.